Today on Let's Talk Crimes, Frank is going to talk to us about violation of probation. So Frank, well, first I want to ask you, what is probation before we get into what happens when you violate your probation?
Well, first I want to tell you good afternoon.
Thank you.
The viewers and the narrator. I never say hi to the narrator. Probation, let me tell you what probation is before I tell you what violation of probation is. Probation is an alternative to being sentenced to incarceration in prison. It's in lieu of incarceration. It's community service of a defendant where the defendant has to comply with the conditions ordered by the court. The conditions could be an array of things. It could be you have to maintain yourself employed, or you have to be seeking employment in good faith. You have to pay back restitution, which is the fund for whatever damage you caused. It could be an array of conditions, but that's what it is. You're going to be supervised while you're in the community, and you have to comply with the conditions in lieu, instead of the court sentencing you to prison. Those are key words, because once I continue, you'll understand why it's so important to understand that it's instead of incarceration.
Okay, so then what happens when you violate your probation?
When you violate your probation because it's in lieu of incarceration, and you violated those conditions, you are now seriously facing real incarceration. The courts, the appellate courts, and most of the United States have already said that probation is considered a grace of the court. It's a privilege, it's not a right. They gave you that privilege. So when you violate the probation, if you violate it however you did, the way it works is the probation officer will fill out an affidavit telling the court that he's the officer in charge of your supervision, that you have violated in whatever way they allege that you have. You will be taken in front of a court, and then you have the right to a violation of probation hearing.
Okay, and
let me tell you about the hearings. Some of it is almost as the procedure was when you first got arrested for the charge. Prosecutor will be involved. The defendant or the defense attorney will talk to the prosecutor to see if they can resolve a new sentence. But what I want the viewers to understand, which is a misconception, is that it doesn't matter that you didn't do a day in jail before. It doesn't matter that you originally had a charge where you were facing up to 30 years in prison, but you didn't get a day in jail and they resolved it with 2 years probation. Once you violate the probation, because it's in lieu, you go back to where you were before you pled guilty. And where were you? Well, you were facing a charge that could have been 30 years in state prison. So you can violate a probation, a 2-year probation, and folks, you can end up in prison for a long time. As a matter of fact, probation is probably one way which many reoffenders end up in prison. They save themselves the first time because they negotiated probation, they violate the probation, and then they end up getting the time that they did not originally get. So you can get a lot of prison time for a violation of probation, the same prison time that you would have received with your original charge.
And then I know it's kind of maybe a rare case, but what if someone didn't willfully violate their probation?
Remember, to find somebody guilty of a charge, they have to find them guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. To find somebody guilty of violating probation, they have to find that he substantially and willfully violated the probation. So if there are times where the courts have found that it was a violation of probation, but you didn't do it willfully. That happens most commonly with the condition of paying back restitution. Probation is about to expire. Probation officer sees that you're not done paying your restitution, violates your probation. You're able to prove to the court that you are actively looking for employment. Right now in COVID-19, that you can't find employment. And that yes, you violated probation, but you didn't do it willfully. So that could save the day for you.
And let me ask you, I know, once you're on probation, I believe that you give up some rights, and there's some weird consequences like that. Can you go into
the probation violation hearing, if it comes to that because you weren't able to negotiate it, is interesting. If you've heard my other episodes, in a regular trial for your original charges, we've all heard it many times. We have our Fifth Amendment protection to remain silent. We don't have to testify. They can accuse us, the state can accuse us of a charge, and you do not have to take the stand. In a violation probation hearing, the court can compel you to testify. You don't have the right to remain silent at the hearing. However, you still have the right to not incriminate yourself on a new offense. But if you're going to testify and it's going to incriminate you as to the violation of probation, the court can still compel you. And why? Well, because you agreed to be on probation. You pled guilty. So the court sees it as you waived your right to not incriminate yourself, only as it pertains to the violation of probation.
Okay, but not to the new crime. If you violated it with the new crime.
If you violated with a new crime, and I want everybody to understand this, because we criminal defense attorneys hear this all the time. And it's very difficult for a non-attorney that understands the system to understand this concept. Logic tells you you're on probation. You're doing fine on your probation, but you get arrested on a new charge. Probation officer files an affidavit that you got arrested on a new charge. It's one of the conditions not to get arrested. And he violates the probation. Logic tells you, well, I have my right to a trial of my new charge, which you do. And if I go to trial and I win, and the jury finds me not guilty, then I did not violate the probation. No, not exactly. Why? Because the standard of proof in front of a jury is on the new charge that you committed the crime beyond a reasonable doubt. The jury may find that you're not guilty because you didn't commit the crime beyond a reasonable doubt. However, the judge is the one that determines if you violated the probation. That judge sat there and he listened to the trial. And while the jury wasn't convinced, the judge may have been convinced at a lower standard. So I've seen, and this is a true story, I've seen an individual be on probation for 15 years. I've seen him pick up a life felony. I've seen him go to a full-blown trial in front of a jury. The jury has said that he's not guilty. The judge has found him guilty for that same charge and sentenced him to 15 years. So you need to understand this. You violate your probation, it's serious business. You violate your probation with a new charge, don't assume that because you beat the new charge, you're going to beat the probation. Not necessarily.
That's scary. And, if you're on probation, that just shows that you need to be extra careful.
It's very scary. Step. And when you get arrested, you're probably not going to have a bond, because when you go to that bond hearing, the bond hearing judge did not put you on probation. It was another judge. So you're probably not going to get out of the bond hearing. And you might have a difficulty getting out later. Violation of probation is serious. I've been wanting to do this episode. People many times resolve their cases with a probation, which is a good thing. But you have to understand before you accept that probation, you cannot step outside of the law, because you will not have your right to a trial. Remember, you already pled guilty. You no longer have the right to a trial on that charge.
All right. And I think we went through all of my questions, but is there anything else you would like to mention about violating probation?
That's all. I not only don't want any of you to violate the probation, I don't want any of you to get arrested. Remember, these episodes are done for that, so that you can keep track of what's happening in the court system. If you have a question that I haven't covered, it could be a question on this episode. It could be something that I haven't touched bases at all. Let's talk crimes@gmail.com. Send a request. We've already made several episodes for some viewers, and we want to make an episode for you. Have a good day, and see you next Wednesday.